My presentation will be focusing on the development of Canadian identity from World War I through to today. I will be focusing on four major events. The Battle of Vimy Ridge on April 9, 1917, the Battle of the Atlantic from September 1939 through to May 1945, D-Day, or more specifically Juno Beach, on June 6, 1944, and the creation of the Avro Arrow, or more specifically its first flight, on March 25, 1958. The very first battle I would like to speak about is the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Throughout the course of the war, the Germans had pushed their way through Belgium and into northern France. Near the border of Belgium, there's a town called Vimy, with a very strategic hill called Vimy Ridge. When the war first broke out, the Germans were quick to take this ridge as it was a very strategic area of France. Earlier attempts in the war, the French and British troops separately attempted to take the ridge on their own. Each attempt cost thousands of lives and simply wasted time. However, later on in the war, the Canadian troops, on their own, made their own separate attempt to capture the ridge and were very successful. There were multiple reasons why this happened. First was the preparation going into the battle. The commander of the Canadian troops at the time was Sir Arthur Currie. This man set up a mock ridge so the Canadian troops could practice over and over their plan for the battle. Canadian troops were trained on a set of plans to take artillery, to take tunnels, and multiple areas of the ridge to create a successful border once the ridge was captured. This was important to Canadian identity because this was the very first time the Canadians had fought overseas by themselves. Usually the Canadian Corps fought with British or French troops against the Germans. This time, the Canadians fought on their own with their own resources, proving that the Canadians could be a strong military presence by themselves. The Battle of the Atlantic was a campaign that lasted throughout the war. Rather than being a single event in one section of the war, the Battle of the Atlantic was a campaign to bring supplies from Canada over to Britain to help with the war effort. However, German U-boats, or wolf packs, made this very difficult. Soon, entire convoys with just a small amount of transport ships with ships called corvettes designed for combat would sail across the Atlantic. Very few of these actually made it to Britain, as these German U-boats in groups called wolf packs would stealthily find their way into the convoy and destroy the transport ships. This campaign strengthened the Canadian identity, or rather, strengthened the Canadian Navy to the point where, from the beginning of the war, with simply 10 ships and 3,000 men, ended with over 700 ships and 90,000 men. This battle is important to Canadian identity because near the ending of the campaign, there were some sightings of German U-boats in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and off the coast of Newfoundland. So now, rather than just being a campaign to assist Britain, it became more personal for those living in the Maritimes and the eastern side of Canada. So, a battle late in the Second World War, referred to by Canadians as Juno Beach, was officially called Operation Overlord. This plan was supposed to take back France, Belgium, and mainly Western Europe from the German occupation. There were 5 beaches on Normandy that were going to be taken: Gold, Sword, Juno, Utah, and Omaha. Utah and Omaha were American beaches. Gold and Sword were being operated by the British troops, and Juno was operated by the Canadian troops. These 5 beaches, all in the area of France called Normandy, were at the time not as heavily armed as the side of the English Channel. The Germans were expecting the attack to be closer to the French-Belgian border, but instead the attack took place further west, closer to the Atlantic. It was because of this surprise that the attack was so successful. But the most staggering of the attacks was Juno Beach. While not all the targets of Juno Beach were accomplished, the Canadian troops gained the most land out of all 5 beaches. Once again, the Canadians fought on their own, both from the air paratroopers and the sea. And which brings me to my next point. After World War II, the RCA, the Canadian government was threatened by the newly formed Russian Soviet Union. The threat was of jet bombers being able to carry atomic bombs over to North America. To fight this new threat, the RCAF, at the time of this threat, the Avro Aviation Company and the Avro really outdid themselves with this new jet. The Canuck actually was bought by the RCAF and the Belgian Air Force, clearly proving that the Canadians had created an almost perfect jet. For a 10-year slot between 1949 and 1959, Canada had gained air supremacy across the world. However, the Americans feared a foreign air supremacy. So, by American request, the Avro project was shut down. Prime Minister John Diefenbaker at the time did not want to shut down this project, but due to the amount of money already spent on the project and the American request, Diefenbaker finally caved in 1959 and had the Avro Arrow project shut down. Every aeroplane was destroyed. The Canadian Avro Aviation Company had designed these planes for the RCAF to service Canada. The aeroplanes were faster than the Canucks, and they were more maneuverable. However, the Americans go. Canada's military focus has shifted since the Cold War. We are now known as an international peacekeeping force. This started in 1956, when Egypt planned to militarize the Suez Canal, blocking the transport of crude oil from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. Canadian Minister of External Affairs, Lester B. Pearson, suggested the creation of a peacekeeping force rather than a military one. He is considered the father of peacekeeping and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1957 for his suggestion. Canada's identity as an independent force has evolved over time. At Vimy Ridge, we proved our worth as a military presence independent of Britain when we recaptured the ridge in 1917. The Battle of the Atlantic showcased the Canadian Navy, which proved that we were powerful on land and sea. The Canadian D-Day effort, starting from Juno Beach, gained more territory than the Americans or British, proving that, once again, Canadians were to be counted on in a crisis. With the creation of the Avro Arrow, we gained air supremacy, even if it was only for a short period of time. The Arrow example also demonstrates growing claims to Canadian identity. We were not yet ready to defend our success or pushed by outside forces like the American government. Lester B. Pearson's efforts furthered the evolution of the Canadian identity with the creation of a peacekeeping force. To this day, Canadian troops comprise much of the peacekeeping forces for the United Nations. We have demonstrated that we are dependable, we are innovative, we are reliable, because after all, we are Canadians.